Good evening. How's everyone? I'm going to be honest, this is my very first time ever teaching the adult class, so I may be a little bit nervous. Just please be gracious with me. I'm usually teaching the junior high this quarter. I'm hoping that I won't have the same disciplinary actions that I have from that, so I'm thinking y'all will be a lot better than they usually are. Tonight we're going to be studying Joseph of Arimathea, those of you following along in the book. I've kind of redone some of my notes. A lot of my material comes from this book. It also comes from the fourfold gospel. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with that. It's commentary on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm going to set it to the side for right now, but it's a very good commentary. It takes all four of the Gospels and puts them together so that you can see it in its entirety side by side. Let me get, in case I forget, next week we'll be studying Phoebe, which is lesson 13. About a month ago, Jody approached me about possibly teaching a couple of lessons this quarter. And I had kind of been thinking about it a little bit, but I really wasn't quite sure about teaching a whole quarter in the adult class. It was a little bit overwhelming for me. When he came and said it would be just a couple of classes, I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity to try it. So I asked what the material might be, and he kind of told me, and he showed me the book of the minor characters, and as I looked through it, I told him that I wasn't sure, but I did want Joseph of Arimathea. I didn't know that one for sure, so I made sure to get that one right up front. Not very long ago, probably a couple months ago, during the Lord's Supper, I was reading through one of the Gospels. I don't remember which Gospel it was, and after the crucifixion, when it just kind of struck me when Joseph of Arimathea came and asked for the body of Christ. Because, as y'all know, not long ago, Tina passed away, and taking care of those arrangements. Then other family members that we've taken care of arrangements for over the years. It kind of struck me as funny that none of Jesus' family or friends, the apostles, anyone connected with Jesus, came and asked for the body of Jesus after he died. And that just kind of struck me as funny, and I'd been kind of wanting to study about that, and that's kind of why I chose this lesson tonight. So as I was studying for this lesson, I got to thinking about, like I said, the family, nobody came and asked for his body. And kind of thinking about that, I thought about Joseph, and really nothing's mentioned about Joseph after he and Mary came back find Jesus when he was 12 in the temple. And after that, I guess that's the last time Joseph's even mentioned. So between Christ being 12 and the start of his missions on earth, Joseph passed away, I guess, at some point in there. Nothing's ever said about it. So obviously he was not around at this time. Mary was, of course, at the crucifixion. That's pretty well recorded. It also talks about Christ's brothers being around at that time as well. Does anybody know how many brothers Christ had? 3? Actually 4. I did not know the answer to that until I started this study. There's several verses. We won't read through them. But Matthew 13, 55 through 56, and Mark 3, in verse 31, mentions the brothers' names. It's James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, or also known as Jude. 2 of the brothers actually wrote books of the Bible. Anybody know what they are? James and Jude, okay? I guess I gave it away because I said James. And then it also mentions that he had sisters. None of the sisters are ever named, but it does say they, so he had at least 2 sisters. but none of them were named. And I believe, I can't remember where it was found, but they were all around at that time, plus the apostles. However, none of them asked for Christ's body. Did Christ have any other family around at this time that y'all know of? Mary had a sister. She sure did. You know what her name was? It's not an easy name, but yes, Cleopas. No, wait, no, sorry. I almost wrote that in my notes last night. It's not that. It's Salome, actually. So if you look in, let's see, Matthew chapter 27 and verse 56. Let's go ahead and turn there. Roger, would you read that? Okay. So you have Mary Magdalene. All right, actually, I'll save those for just a second. All right, and let's also look at Mark 16 and verse 40. They're all listed differently under here. Here's the reason I'm going through all of these. And that is not right. Mark 16:40. Mark 15:40. Daryl, would you mind reading that? Okay, and then John 19 and verse 25. Mike, would you want to read that? Okay. All three of these, they all three list Mary Magdalene, and they all three list, let's see, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, or Joseph. And then the third woman is named differently in each one. In Matthew 27, she's listed as the mother of the sons of Zebedee. In Mark 15, it gives us her name, which is Salome. And in John 19, it lists her as Mary's sister. That's how you, because she's the only oddball out of all three of them, that's how you know all three of those were the same. Okay? Do you know, okay, so Jesus' aunt was there, who is the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Do y'all know who the sons of Zebedee are? James and John, okay? I just put this together as I was doing this lesson. James and John are Christ's cousins. Kind of blew my mind because I never really thought about that before. Growing up, just kind of reading through everything, I always thought James and John was just somebody he was passing by and talked to and said, "Come follow me." Come to find out, he's known them his whole life, which kind of blew my mind. Okay? So, besides just being the apostles, you had Jesus' mother, his brothers for sure. I can't remember, didn't really list the sisters as being at the crucifixion. You have his aunt, and then you have two of his cousins, which were obviously apostles also, and none of them asked for the body of Jesus. And so I often wondered why about that. But who did ask for his body? Joseph of Arimathea. And really and truly, after studying this lesson, you can really see God's hand in Joseph being the one that took Christ's body. And because it really, and we'll get further into this in the lesson, but it really shows, how you couldn't really say that Christ wasn't dead, that he wasn't raised from the dead, and all that. It wasn't just, some people say that they kind of hid Christ's body and he wasn't really dead and all that. But you can't really say that after going through the whole process of everything. Let's see. Let's look at the context for this with Joseph. It's in all four Gospels. Let's first look at Matthew 27, 57 through 61. I do want to read these out loud, then we'll discuss everything. Gary, you want to get that? Okay, let's also look at Mark 15, 42 through 47. Tommy, do you mind reading that? Mark 15, 42 through 47. Okay, in Luke 23, 50 through 56. Joe, do you mind getting that? Okay. And one of us look at John 19, 38 through 42. So, do you mind reading that? 38 through 42. these four passages are the only place that Joseph of Arimathea is mentioned in the Bible. What are some of the things that we know about Joseph from these passages? He is a rich man. Okay. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a second. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. Okay. What else? He was looking for the kingdom. Very good. What else? What's that? He did not consent to the death as from the council. He was a disciple of Jesus. Okay. All those represent all we know about Joseph. Let's see. He was a disciple of Jesus, and John is the only one that records him as being a secret disciple for fear of the Jews. If you actually looked at the lesson, there's a pretty good section on that on here. I'm not going to talk about that as much tonight, unless I just run out of material here, but I'm kind of cutting him a little bit of slack on that. Not that I agree with him being a secret disciple. However, he did overcome that, and it's quite obvious with the fact that he did ask for the body of Jesus. Before we go any further, though, is everybody familiar with the Sanhedrin Council? I've always heard the terminology, but I didn't know 100%. If you have your book, I'm just going to read that straight out of the book, just for reference. And that's on page 56. The Sanhedrin, also called the Council, was the highest ruling body among the Jewish people during the time of Christ. The exact origins of the Sanhedrin are unknown. It does not appear in history until the time of the Macedonian Empire. The Sanhedrin was made up of 71 members, also called rulers, in Luke 24:20. The high priest was always the head of the Sanhedrin. The other members consisted of chief priests, elders, and scribes. The two major sects of the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, were well represented in the Sanhedrin. Paul once used this to his advantage while being tried before the council. He turned these opposing parties against each other by bringing up a doctrine upon which they disagreed. The Sanhedrin was granted limited authority over certain religious, civil, and criminal matters by the nations that ruled over them during their history. The Romans denied subject nations the power of capital punishment, which is why the Jews had to take Jesus before Pilate to have him put to death. Men tried before the Sanhedrin include Jesus, Peter, John, and the other apostles, Stephen, and Paul. Just noteworthy noting, I always heard the term, but I didn't know exactly what it was. So kind of ruled over there the Jewish part religiously, but obviously it did not take precedence over Roman authority, and they still had to answer to the Romans on all that, and we'll discuss that a little bit with the body of Jesus and the actual crucifixion itself. There's lessons that we can learn from Joseph. He did not go along with the majority. The Bible does not tell if Joseph was actually present for the Lord's trial, but we are told in Luke that he did not consent to their decision. Also at a time when most of Jesus' disciples fled, Joseph came forward to claim the Lord's body, and he also gave it a proper burial. Right. No, it didn't. He did, and actually, Pilate was very surprised that Christ had passed, as mentioned, because he said already, and I was kind of thought that a little bit of surprising myself, but kind of looking over some of the crucifixion, kind of Google searched that one and just did a history of it, and a lot of times very few times people have lasted a full week on the cross or on a cross, and then usually it took a couple days, though minimal. So Jesus to die as quickly as he did was unusual. But yeah, it did take a lot of courage. You think about, I know it's not as extensive as talking with the king, but it's not, you can't just go up to Pilate and say, hey, how's it going? Can I have that body? I mean, you're looking at a leader, and I'm sure somebody kind of had to have an appointment with, which the only good thing with, not the only, but one of the good things about him being on the Sanhedrin, I'm sure he actually had a little bit of a relationship with Pilate, just having to deal with stuff back and forth. I think Mark, that's in one of my notes. Well, it just goes along with my second part of he overcame his fear. I like how Mark 15:43 says he gathered up courage and went before Pilate. So it's not something he was, you can tell it really got him out of his comfort zone just to have to even go up and ask for the body. So that's my second point, actually, going along with that, as he overcame his fear. One of the third points we can find in Joseph is he had to pay a price. Overcoming his fear, obviously, lets the cat out of the bag. Everybody knows now he is a full-blown follower of Christ. What do y'all think how would that affect him being on the Sanhedrin? I would imagine he got kicked off. He and Nicodemus both, Nicodemus helping Christ with the body, they were both members of the Sanhedrin, and neither one of them's ever talked about again, of course, after these passages, so we don't really know for sure. But more than likely, he was kicked off of the Sanhedrin Council. Even being Sadducees and Pharisees, there's even both sides of that sect there, they had issues with Christ. So more than likely, they never retained their seats there or their influence within the Sanhedrin. What else did what other prices did he pay? I'll think of. Okay, cost of things he got. He bought a linen. Actually, Nicodemus brought the spices. But the linen, we're going to talk more about that linen here in a minute, because the linen Christ, or not Christ, the linen that Joseph used was not just a cheap linen. He actually got a nicer linen. What else did he have to pay or give up? The tomb, okay. I was thinking about that last night. I'm not sure. I know he is a follower of Christ, and he was waiting on the kingdom. And of course, we know the apostles didn't fully understand everything that was to come later. But he gave up his tomb. He didn't know. I don't know if he knew Christ would be resurrected and it would be open in 3 days. I didn't know if he fully got that or not. But however, he did give that up, not being full aware. And then one other thing with that, what can y'all think of? Could not worship at the Passover. Why not? Because it was unclean. Okay, in Numbers 19, 11 through 22, and we don't have the time to read that, but because he handled a dead body, he is considered unclean and was not able to worship at the Passover. Seems like Bruce or TM1 kind of was talking about the uncleanness of that the other day. Not specifically Joseph Arimathea, but somebody wasn't able to worship. That's what it was. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so his actions fulfilled a prophecy. This goes along with what Darrell mentioned earlier about Joseph being a rich man. Do y'all know what prophecy he fulfilled? Buried with the rich. Okay. You know where it's at? It's Isaiah 53 and verse 9. His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit found in his mouth. Let's see. Joseph's actions provide evidence of the Lord's death and resurrection. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. John 19 and Matthew 27 is where I went with quite a bit of this. And we're also going to discuss the linen cloth. The linen cloth information I got, that's one of the things I got from the Fourfold Gospel. Do y'all know what kind of linen cloth it was? It was called a sindon. The sindon or linen vestment was very costly, and it was not even worn by the middle class. So it's evidently quite expensive cloth that he used for Jesus. Part of this whole process too, I want y'all to keep in mind, is Jesus died probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You think about the time Joseph went to talk with Pilate to get his body. The time he actually got his body, then they had him and Nicodemus had to carry it to the tomb, and then evidently the tomb had to be close. But keep that in mind, because they had to have everything done before the sunset, because the Passover preparation was about to start. So once that started, that time came, they couldn't do anything else with the body. So I think, if I remember seeing that correctly, that's around 6. So we got about a 3-hour time from when Christ died to when they had to finish getting his body prepared. Some of the information I have: Joseph and Nicodemus each showing reverence to Christ in their own way. Joseph, of course, buying a sindon instead of a cheaper cloth. And then Nicodemus by a wonderful wealth of spices that he brought. I think it's about 100 pounds worth of the two. And the myrrh and aloes that he used or bought, these were generally used in a Jewish burial. I guess even the burial of a lot of them in that time. But they would take strips of the linen cloth and they would mix it with the myrrhs and aloes, and then they would wrap the body. According to custom, the body gets wrapped 3 times. First, they wrap to the armpits. Then the next set of wraps goes to the neck, and then the third wrapping goes over the head. So if you think about the strips of linen and 100 pounds worth of aloe and myrrh, all wrapped around Christ. I can't remember which one it was. One of them's more pasty, I think, and it kind of acts like a glue. So once they get him all wrapped up, he's good and tight. Nobody's really breaking out of that. As you think about people saying that Christ wasn't really dead, they just kind of laid him in there. Well, they wrapped him 3 times, bound up, and that's like glue on those linen. So he's all bound up tight. Not going to break out of that, okay? And then also being the glue and then going over the head, you know, that he was not breathing through all that. Like he was halfway alive and he just woke up later. But total encasement with everything being wrapped 3 times and all those, the total weight of the encasement would have been around 117 to 120 pounds. So you think about that extra weight on the body as well with everything. Let's see. Also going along with all that, well, going along with that timeline too, they had to do all that wrapping and mixing all that stuff together within that 3 hours as well. So that, imagine they had to work very quickly. And this is another part where I say you can see God's hand in this. What do we know about Joseph's tomb that he had? It was new, which meant what? No other bodies in it. Okay, we think about funerals and stuff today, and we bury a body. You have just a grave, and we bury people or bury a person in the grave. Back then, even going all the way back to the Old Testament, they always buried the family typically together. There might be several bodies in there. So being a new tomb and he'd be the only one in there, there was no mistaking that it might be somebody else that they grabbed. They come out, okay, if somebody was to steal the body. So Christ being the only one in there, new tomb. What else do we know about the tomb? What? Yeah, one door. Why is that? Okay. Right. Right. Yeah, there was only one door on this tomb. How do we know that, though? Yeah, there was the door to the tomb. Okay, it was hewn out of rock. They had actually hewn the tomb out of a rock. You think about some of the Old Testament, some of the burials where the family tomb was an actual, like a cave. A lot of times we know caves have an in, and some of them only have the one in and no out, but or one in and out. But some of them, if you go on through, there's another way out of the tomb. This being hewn out of the rock, we know that there was only one entrance, and we know, like Roger said, it was covered by a big rock, and it was also guarded. Okay, so there was no way of knowing, no way of getting Christ out of there without somebody knowing it through a back door or anything like that. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe. Right. Right. Literally. But it was a lot of work because I know what you're talking about on that, helping you with your mom, and also my papa on just the body itself. When there's no help back, it's a lot of weight, a lot of struggling back and forth, especially getting all that wrapping stuff just right. And I'm not sure with the aloes and Murano is kind of pasty and sticky, but having to mix all that together and then wrap it as well, I imagine on top of the dead weight made it a little harder. Harder. Right. Right. Yeah, they also had to get him off the cross. I didn't think about that. Right. No, it was not easy at all. Right. Yeah, it was very, I mean, they took a lot of care uh, for him. Uh, I know it says when they took him off the cross, they wrapped him in a linen cloth. I don't know if it's the same linen cloth that they used for his wrappings or if they had two separate. Not that that really matters, but I was thinking about that when you said taking him off the cross, because they had to take him off the cross. And being nailed to the cross, I'm sure that was not an easy task as well. Going through, when I Googled all that, and the Romans were very good, as we know, crucifying, and there was several depictions uh, that they had of people that had been crucified. They tied them to the cross with ropes. They nailed them to the cross with spikes or metal, anything they could find. Uh, they would paint them different ways. I guess they were just trying to see how much. I think part of it depended on the crime that they did, as to how ruthless their they got with everything. Did I see a hand in the back also? Yes, sir. I picture him as being like basically like mummified. You see a mummy and they're all wrapped up. Uh, right, right, right. Right. I didn't know how much. I didn't know how extensive the wrappings got either. I kind of started studying on this. Tommy. Yes. I think some of them they did, some they didn't. It just all depended. Right. Right. Which is probably why it didn't last as long on the cross. Uh, One other thing, real quick, too. Uh, there was a law that the Jews had that no one could stay was to stay on the cross. I guess for the preparation during preparation time. That's one of the reasons they went and asked for for the asked Pilate for them to break their legs, um, so that they could get them down before then. Uh, and I think the commentary that I read on that said, although that's a law, they think they kind of got laxed in that law because they actually had to go ask. I don't know if it was, I said Pilate. I don't remember if it was Pilate or the commander. They actually had to go ask them to do that, which kind of, I think, told them that maybe it wasn't as common as it used to be for them to do that. I think that's actually all I have. Any other questions or anything? I've heard that. I didn't really study anything on that because I was mainly going over the actual burial and not so much the resurrection. So I don't know. I've heard. I kind of remember hearing something about that before. There was something about a certain way it was folded and found. What's that? The handkerchief? John 20. Okay. Placed separate. Okay. I remembered seeing something about that a while back, but it didn't. It wasn't anything that Joseph had done on there, so I wouldn't did anything. Yes. No. Right. Right. Yeah, because it being hewn out of the rock, and there was only the one opening, and they closed it up with the rock. It was still there wouldn't have been any oxygen flow in that, especially 3 days worth. Uh, so next week we're going to study Phoebe, which I think is the actual last lesson in the book.